this is a slide showing the 30 years, the last 30 years of temperatures in Oroville. And the yellow, the more dense the yellow is to the right-hand side of the image, then the hotter it is. And the more sort of dark it is the cooler it is. So as you can see, there's been a gradual but distinct increase of a temperature. Things are getting hotter in Oroville, particularly for the last 5 or 6 years. So that's the background to this research. Next slide. And we're part of a whole movement throughout India on air conditioning. It's become quite a big and important subject. Of the 290 odd million households in India, fewer than 20 million have AC. So it's a very small 7 or 8% of the household population of India actually have air conditioning at this point. However, there's a projection by the World Economic Forum here and others that the stock of the number of ACs is expected to be over 1 billion by 2050, which is a 44 increase from 2016. So that's a lot. That's a huge increase in air conditionings, and so a huge increase in the demand on the electricity grid and microgrids. Next slide. Why is the control of domestic air conditioning important? So one is, of course, it's expanding, as we've just said, and it expands here from this institute is predicted at 10% per annum for the foreseeable future. And what this does is it creates a big stress on the grid, because roughly speaking, an air conditioner in a typical Indian house doubles the electricity demand. And a lot of that demand is in the evening and at night, because that's when people choose generally to put on their air conditioning. And of course, that's the time when the sun is not shining. And so we're not getting the normal solar impact for renewables. So part of this, or this whole project, is about creating what's called flexibility. And the flexibility is necessary so that we can shift the load as far as possible by orchestrating large numbers of air conditioners to create the opportunity for applying more and more renewable energy, which Andrew will expand on. So thank you. Over to you, Andrew. Andrew is the principal investigator for the research from Heriot-Watt University.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I'm calling in from Edinburgh in Scotland today. So just a little bit about the project. So the project's funded by the UK government and involves 5 partners. So Heriot-Watt University, Oroville Consulting in Oroville, EDS, who are a consultancy based in Delhi, Fire, who is the Findhorn component, and then Scene Consulting, also a Scottish-based consultancy based in Edinburgh. So that's the kind of makeup of the project partners. Next slide. So what we've been doing is installing equipment in your houses, as you're aware, and we've been monitoring your AC consumption and the temperatures in your houses. And we've been doing that for a period of time before we imparted any control, so that we were able to try and construct some data sets that told us about how people use AC systems in Oroville and what kind of effect the weather, the climate that we were also monitoring, had on how they use the AC systems. So this slide's split into kind of 2 components. On the left-hand side here, there's a grey box, and it kind of starts to discretize the types of AC users. And we see, what we see is we've kind of looked at 4 different types of user here. There seems to be 4 different types of user apparent in the data. The long rectangular bars show a 24-hour period of an average day in March and an average day in May, so that we can see what the impact of the climate is on when the AC gets used. And blue indicates that the AC system's not being used, and red indicates that the AC system's on. So the first kind of group are daytime extenders. So they only use their AC system during the day. And the effect of the warming climate is that they just extend the period over which cooling is necessary. The second group below them are the daytime to day-night users. So they start off in March only using the AC system during the day, and then they extend that period to an overnight pattern. So as the temperature warms, they require the AC system to assist with their sleeping patterns. Then we have nighttime extenders. So they never use the AC system during the day. They only use it at nighttime or late in the evening in March. And that extends then to the entire kind of sleeping period, if you like. And then the last group move from daytime users to full-time users. So they move from being only using their AC system during the day to pretty much wanting AC, a cooled environment 24 hours a day. And that might be exacerbated by the COVID situation that we're in, where people are in their houses more often than we would have expected them to be in. So that's the kind of pattern of users, if you like. On the right-hand side, what we try to look at is, okay, well, what does the load profile look like? As Michael says, it's about stress on grid, this project. So the electricity draw, if you like, at different times of the day is where the problem is going to occur. The top graph, which shows up 2 line graphs, shows an average day in March, which is the light blue graph, and an average day in May, which is the dark blue line, extend a 24-hour period. And we can see that overall, in March, there's a lot of sleeping. It's mainly it's principally a nighttime operation with a bit of mid-afternoon usage. But as we move to the warmer environment, that kind of pattern is kind of replicated. It's still largely an overnight operation, an evening operation, with that sort of mid-afternoon peak as well, of people needing to cool during the hottest period of the day. And when we look at the daily consumption, so the aggregate daily consumption of all the users, and then correlate that against how warm that it was on that day, we can start to see a kind of correlation, if you like, or we're able to derive a relationship between how warm it is and how much the AC gets used. And that relationship is very important because that effectively describes the baseline performance of how you use AC systems in a fit and forget strategy, if you like, where you're entirely under the control of the AC systems is entirely under your control. So that's the kind of pattern of what we can see in the baseline. So next slide, Tara, please. So just to recap what Michael talked about what we're trying to do. So DAC seeks to be a novel system that effectively we create a control platform in the cloud that's able to absorb all that data coming to it. And then it uses that data to make decisions about managing the AC system or curtailing AC system operation in a manner where what we hope to see is that with this revised control, we see less stress on the grid, we see lower energy consumption, and what we hope is that we don't have too large an impact on the thermal comfort preferences, the temperatures that you want to see in your houses. And I think Michael made a good job of describing why we're doing this. It's to manage AC growth, the ownership of AC, in a manner that means that the electricity grid can absorb it. So we move away from that strategy of fit and forget, where an AC system is just installed and it's entirely under your aegis to control it, to a system where the control takes account of 2 objective functions now. One is the thermal comfort requirement of the house, and that's paramount. But the second is how the grid manages those AC systems as the number of them expand within the local area. So that's the overview of the project. So next slide, yep. So how does DAC work then? How have we arrived at our control methods? So this is just a quick explanation of what the control's done and some timing. So what we've done is we split the day into 40-minute periods, and then we've split each 40-minute period into 8-minute episodes. And we basically are controlling each of those 8-minute episodes. The 8-minute the reason why we've chosen 8 minutes, just very quickly, is that typically when you switch an AC system off, the compressor that's generating the cool for you has a lockout period, and you can't go back in and switch it back on again. It has to kind of warm down. So to keep the system safe, it warms down before you can then go and switch the system back on again. And what we have to do, therefore, is make sure that our control methodology doesn't in any way influence that. So we've got 40-minute periods where we're in part in control, and then 8-minute episodes, so that we've got the capacity to manage that lockdown period. At the start of each 40-minute period, we randomly allocate each dwelling into one of 3 groups. And the first group allows AC operation on each of the 5 8-minute episodes within that 40-minute period. And the second group, they can only have access to 4 of them, and the third group can only have access to 3 of them. So some houses in the 40-minute period are curtailed, and some are more heavily curtailed, and some are left alone. Every 40 minutes, we reallocate the houses, and we cannot allocate a house to the most extreme curtailment position for 2 40-minute periods in a row. So that we try and soften the blow a little bit, if you like. Now, we only apply DAC control between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. And the reason we do that is that there are some voltage regulation problems on the arable grid because of the amount of PV that you've got in the system. And where an AC system is working with a voltage regulator, that they do see outages during the day, typically during the day, because of that problem. And because we're effectively trying to curtail operation, if the operation is being curtailed for another reason, because the PV, then it would mess with our capacity to see patterns in the data. So we only control from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. We started control at midnight on the 19th of May, and the trial will run through till September. So that's kind of some background of what DAC does. So next slide. So how have we done? So analysing data between the 19th of May and around about the 1st of June, 31st of May. So this is very interim results. There are 3 kind of Kpi metrics that are very important to us. One is consumption. How much energy is the AC unit consuming? The second is how much load, what is the load shape? That load shape curve that I've showed, have we had an influence on what that is? And then how have we, if we've made a change, what influence has that had on the temperature that's being recorded in people's dwellings? So talking about energy consumption first, which is the top long graph, the orange curve is the baseline performance, the consumption level that we would have expected you to use. We would have expected you to use that kind of level of consumption in your dwellings if we had not been controlling. The blue is what we measured, so that's what we measured with our control in place. And we can see that there is a lowering in the electricity consumption by the AC units. The kind of day that sticks out is the 24th of May. And the reason why that's not showing any difference is that we switch the control off on Thursdays. So we effectively let the control rest for a day, just so that we can check against our baseline as we're moving the control forward. So in this instance, on the 24th of May, you reverted more or less back to your baseline performance, and then the control system was imparted again, and we can see that the consumption level was then depressed again. So it's a good result. We've seen overall about a 15% reduction in energy consumption from the AC units as a consequence of our control methodology. In terms of power, we can see that the graph below that, the red line is the power draw of the AC unit over 24 hours. So this is the average power in the dwelling. And the green line is so the red is what we would expected you to have drawn, and the green is what we did draw. So we can see a depression in power during the periods where we're controlling. And in the graphs below are just some sample graphs of some dwellings to show average temperature profiles. So again, this is the temperature profile we would have expected you to deliver in that house if you'd been under the control had been your own, compared to what we actually measured. So in dwelling 1, there isn't much change. We haven't had a big impact on your overall cooling requirement. But in dwelling 2 and dwelling 3, we can see that we have made the house hotter. So the blue line is the control period, and we've made the house hotter. So if you look at that in the round, what we've seen is a 15% reduction in energy consumption. We've seen around about a 30% reduction in load during the period where we're controlling. And we've seen about a 1 degree, on average, about a 1 degree increase in temperature in dwellings. So there's no free lunch. Our control imparts a reduction in impact on the grid. But in order to do that, we've made your houses a little bit warmer. So that's the kind of overview, interim review of the of where we've got to from the 1st of June. As I say, we are going to be running this project on through September, so these results will become more robust and grow as we move through June, July, and into August. And that's the kind of overview, if you like, of the trial. So I'll take you through the trial, take you through the reasons why we're doing it, give it a bit of information about how climate is warming in your community, and then some information about how the trial is performing. So I hope that's been informative. I think it's time now to take some questions.